Yeah, my name is Nick Dale. I'm with the Poultry Science Department here at the University of Georgia. I'm now retired and have emeritus status. I grew up in a very rural part of upstate New York, probably about 50 miles, 50 or 60 miles west of Newburgh, right on the Delaware River. Thoroughly enjoyed being a country boy, fishing, hunting, hiking in the woods. Very great upbringing for a kid if you like that sort of thing, and I certainly did. The first paying job I ever had was basically digging trenches with a pick and shovel for someone who was doing some construction, and that was very useful because, as the supervisor pointed out to me continually, Nick, consider this a college reminder. Well, I grew up in a very small town, so I might not have done well at a large university, such as the University of Georgia. I went to a small liberal arts school in Florida, at the time called Florida Presbyterian College, now called Eckerd College. And it was a small school, probably 500 or 600 people, and I was very much at home there. I bounced around first from, I guess, from mathematics to economics, and finally wound up in history. And I had an absolutely spectacular professor, Dr. Burr Brundage, who was just a fascinating lecturer, and he was a real authority on many things, including Latin American history, and I think that rubbed off. I wound up specializing in Latin American history as an undergraduate. One recalls the late 60s when I graduated from college, it was a very idealistic time, and I decided to join the Peace Corps. And I was in Chile, in South America, working on a reforestation project. I'd always known something about forestry, having grown up in a rural area. And in part of the year, we started several projects in swine and poultry, and I really enjoyed the very limited contact I had. So when I came back to the United States, I gravitated toward a degree in agriculture, which I thought was an idealistic thing to do, breeding food for humanity, and preferred animals over plants and chickens over pigs. So that's how I wound up in poultry, I guess. I've often wondered what I would have wound up doing had it not been for that. Perhaps something equally satisfying, but who could ever know? As time has gone by, I've realized that poultry is by far the most efficient way of recovering proteins that humans don't normally eat. And there are many things we put into a poultry diet which are perfectly nutritious, but you and I don't eat them. So the chicken is a way to get that back into the human food chain in both poultry meat and eggs. And one could go on forever about the suitability of eggs in developing countries. Number one, they don't need refrigeration. And number two, obviously, if a baby chick could hatch from that egg, every known nutrient must be present. So it's a fabulous supplement to whatever other odds and ends that people might have contact with. When I returned to the United States after serving the Peace Corps, I worked for several years just to get some money together and to figure out where I wanted to go. And I was in Miami at the time, and a former roommate from my undergraduate days was here at the University of Georgia in a doctoral program in another area. I came up to visit, fell in love with the town, fell in love with the university, found out they had a strong poultry science program, and was very fortunate to wind up here myself. I was married just let me put it this way, on our honeymoon we moved to Athens, and we haven't left. My wife, Beatrice, is from Ecuador, and my two sons, Nicholas and Peter, have remained here in Athens. We're extremely fortunate. That doesn't happen often that a family manages to stay together. As I switched from history to chickens, my older son, Peter, switched from public relations to being a chef. He runs the National Restaurant downtown. And the younger son, Nicholas, switched from ag economics to making chocolate, and he has a chocolate shop at 5 Points. So that's about where we are today. By the time I graduated, I was almost in the late 30s. I was a very slow student because all my graduate work had been done while working as a technician and taking courses part-time. And by that time, one has children, one has a dentist, gynecologist, pediatrician, and one was associated with a really fabulous department. So when the opportunity came to stay here in Athens, it didn't take much of much thinking to decide that I would be very honored to remain here. Undoubtedly, the most satisfying part of my professional work here at the university has been gaining the respect of the stakeholders, because when one is in poultry nutrition, one's stakeholders are perhaps the most sophisticated group with any extension specialist anywhere deals with. All have either masters or PhDs. So one can't come out with a simple textbook statement and think one is making an impact. Rather, one has to work with these people on real world problems. And the fact that I was able to do that with some success has been extraordinarily satisfying. I was extremely fortunate to come along at a time when there were some real giants here at the University of Georgia. My major professor, Dr. Henry Fuller, was certainly one who was extremely supportive and was a fabulous role model and mentor. Dr. Leo Jensen, another nutritionist, was a massively important figure in the profession. Dr. Malcolm Reed in parasitology. People like that have an influence on one that may be difficult to articulate, but they were very important in my life, and I was very fortunate to have had contact and taken courses from them. By the late 1980s, I think the science base of poultry had become so diverse that it was obvious to many people that one journal was not broad enough to include all the advances. At the time, it was apparent that many practical, applied type articles, which might covered research perhaps not in the formal laboratory, were not being accepted for publication, and there was no good way to get that information disseminated. That was obvious to us, to those of us in the more applied part of poultry, and it was very obvious to individuals in industry, in the poultry industry. So when we put together the idea of coming up with a new journal, it was very warmly received. It was not at all an uphill struggle. It was warmly received, not only with enthusiastic comments, but industry supported us financially in getting the journal off the ground. I think the important thing about the journal is getting information from the files, from the computer disks, into the public view. And I think in that sense it has been very important. I used it myself because my studies were, of course, very applied. And so I have to say that I'm quite satisfied with the effect of the journal. Yes, indeed. Well, I think I may have been a bit different in that I switched from the liberal arts, in my case history, into poultry. Probably most of our graduate students in poultry, had more ability in the basic sciences than I ever did. And if one is interested in something, one tends to focus on that. And perhaps if one is very, very academically oriented, one might lose certain perspectives about poultry. It's a fascinating thing to do research on, but let's not lose sight of the practical applications and the enormous impact we're having in the world. I hope that a student wouldn't become so fascinated by the pure science that they lose sight of the significance of poultry production and our role in society, what we contribute to society. It's very humbling to be a PSA Fellow because, as I mentioned a few moments ago, I had, in the course of my studies and professional work, I've been fortunate to have contact with real giants in the profession. And virtually all of those have been named fellows, and one wonders whether or not I even come close to deserving it. But it's very humbling, certainly, to be named a PSA Fellow. I think it's a wonderful capstone, perhaps. During one's professional life, one feels gratified by being invited to speak in conferences in other states and other countries, and to have people compliment one's work, saying that the research one did has proved very useful to someone. That is very satisfying, and just being a PSA Fellow just puts a little icing on the cake. I go on the rest of my life feeling that I've accomplished something as a professional.